Welcome everybody. We are glad to see you today on this session. Uh, Before I start, I just want to inform that as soon as you have questions, you please write it down on the chat box so that we can address them on timely basis. If the questions are written at the end of the session, we may not be able to take it up. With this, let us start the session. We chose this topic because this particular topic is going to be more and more relevant, as we go forward. When you see different geographies, like how it happened in Japan or how it happened in China, initially everybody was focusing on the local domestic, market, and then once the domestic market kind of was taken care of, then they started expanding overseas. And this is a trend which I believe India also will see in coming future. COVID notwithstanding, we will see that there will be a lot of opportunities which Indian companies will take to expand themselves and grow outside India. We started this trend started early 2000, when our large companies like Tata's and Reliance started going and acquiring companies outside India. They did test waters, uh, some with good result, many with not so good result. So you saw that was the first wave where Indian conglomerate started looking at acquiring companies abroad. Tata was the leader of the pack, and then Reliance, both Anil Ambani group and Mukesh Ambani group, both of them started looking at overseas acquisitions. We saw acquisition coming in energy and steel sector. We saw acquisitions coming in, some of the other core sectors where they started looking at overseas market. Then the next wave was followed with software industry, where a lot of Indian software industry started looking overseas market. Uh, of course, Infosys was one of the last one to go, but they also went and acquired. But then a lot of other companies, whether it is Emphasis, whether it is Wipro, and some of the other companies started looking at overseas market acquisitions. Um, the third wave, which we are seeing now, is our unicorns. A lot of unicorns are focused on Indian markets, and their growths are happening because of how the Indian economy is growing. But at some point of time, they will start, in order to keep the growth, they will need to start looking at overseas market. Um, we already see the trend starting. We have seen acquisitions by Byju's, Zomato. We have seen acquisitions by Oyo, by Hike. So we are seeing all these acquisitions happening on overseas market, and this is just a trend which will keep on going, which are growing, and that's why today's topic becomes very relevant. Today in our chat, we are going to look at some of the regulations. Uh, Key regulations include exchange control. This is a key regulation, but also we will look at how do you structure, because structuring your acquisitions abroad becomes very relevant. So we'll look at the structure issues, exchange control issues. We'll look at some of the issues with respect to foreign jurisdictions, and also foreign laws, because the moment you start looking at acquisition in the US, in UK, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, you are now looking at different laws outside India. And of course, you have foreign lawyers, law firms to help you there too. But having a broad idea of what you need to look out for is very important. Uh, with this, let me start the session and go to Parag. Parag, can you give basic rundown on the regulations and on the how do they structure the outbound acquisitions?
Sure, Abhinav. So, in terms of the key regulations that govern any outbound acquisition by an Indian company, it's covered by FEMA, ODI regulations. Now, what FEMA ODI regulations basically stipulate, it is the entire gamut of laws, or the provisions that need to be kept in mind while acquiring a company abroad. And this is from an Indian law perspective. I think later in the session we'll touch some key aspects from a offshore jurisdictions as well. Right now, key things to keep in mind while acquiring a company overseas is, there are few distinctions. One is in terms of the sectors that can be invested, or an acquisition can be made. So while generally an acquisition in any sector is permitted, barring any acquisition of a banking business, any company involved in banking business, or any company which is involved in the real estate business. However, real estate business, as it is in the under the FBI policy, it does not cover any development of townships or commercial projects, etc. Right. So these are the only sectors which are restricted completely. There's an additional condition with respect to any company which is engaged in financial services. There are certain additional conditions that have to be fulfilled, that the Indian company should be regulated by the RBI or a financial services regulator. It should have made profits in the last 3 years. Approvals of the relevant regulatory authorities in India, which is RBI or SEBI, or the overseas regulator should be taken, and the Indian company should have complied with the prudential norms. Another very important aspect that has to be kept in mind while acquiring a foreign company is, because RBI regulates the inflow and outflow of exchange foreign currency from India, right? Is there are certain thresholds that have been prescribed by RBI while remitting any kind of money outside India from by an Indian company. So the threshold that is currently applicable is 400% of the net worth of the Indian company. Now, net worth means your paid up capital and free reserves as per your latest audited balance sheet. This threshold has been around for over a decade, but briefly in 2013, RBI, in order to conserve outflow of cash from India, had reduced it to 100% for a certain period of time, and beyond that, it required approval of RBI. However, later on, in a couple of years, they revised it to 400%, and since then, it has been at that threshold. Now, when I say amount of money, so the relevant term used here is financial commitment by an Indian company overseas. Now, what financial commitment is not only limited to your investment in an overseas company in terms of acquisition of shares, or subscription of shares. It covers the entire set of activities in which an Indian company can support its overseas subsidiary. So it includes investment in equity shares, preference shares, whether convertible, non-convertible, any loan given by the Indian company to its overseas subsidiary, any guarantee given by the Indian company to its overseas subsidiary. So while 100% of a corporate guarantee is covered, in case it's a performance guarantee, then only 50% of that amount is calculated. Again, even in case an Indian bank has provided a bank guarantee which is backed by collateral from the Indian company, then that also gets covered in the 100% of that amount also gets covered in the financial commitment. So it's very important to keep this in mind while making any acquisition overseas, because you need to be sure of while negotiating the price, consideration, etc. Though we have seen structures where, while because there are a lot of cases where Indian companies have gone ahead and acquire companies which were bigger than them in terms of size, etc. So there are structures used where overseas leverage is used by the Indian company for that purposes. An Indian company can provide collateral, which I think Anusha will be covering during the later stage of this discussion. So while this is a restriction, there are structures around which where the overseas subsidiary can take a loan from a bank in order to for the purposes of funding that acquisition. So we have seen those kind of things. You know Apart from this, another way of funding the acquisition is through swap of shares, right? Where the Indian company, when it acquires shares from the sellers of an overseas company, it can issue shares, its own shares, Indian company shares, in order to fund that acquisition. This was permitted by RBI in around 2015, and here the key thing to keep in mind is, while doing the acquisition, the swap ratio should be agreed. there should be a valuation conducted by a merchant banker in India or an investment bank outside India, for the purposes, because both the companies will have to be valued in order to arrive at that swap ratio. I think the most important part, from an overseas acquisition that, we keep facing, while, these are all compliance requirements, etc., which is easy to figure out, these are numbers, etc. The key issue that we have seen that arise most of the times is something called round tripping. Now, interestingly, round tripping is not defined per se under any law, right? Whether under our exchange control laws by RBI or under tax laws. Though, broadly it is covered, there are provisions which eventually cover a round tripping. Now, what is a round tripping, right? Round tripping is basically a situation where an Indian company remits money to its overseas subsidiary, has an investment in an overseas subsidiary, and that overseas subsidiary then has some exposure in India in the form of an FDI, right? So it's not about, overseas subsidiary repatriating dividends, etc., to the Indian company, but if that overseas subsidiary has any other investment in India. Now, because the law is slightly ambiguous around this, there are views that, even if there is even exposure of one share from India or one share from overseas company to India, round tripping provisions will apply, right? And typically you have to go to RBI and take their approval in case, you are dealing in a transaction where this kind of situation arises, right? So, we have gone to RBI for certain situations, where these things happen. So there are cases where RBI has permitted this, after looking at the transaction, where they believe it's a bona fide transaction and there is no, laundering of funds, basically, taking money from outside India and then bringing it back into India in a different way, right? So where there was a bona fide business transaction, RBI has permitted it, right? But we have also seen situations where RBI was not happy with the transactions and it has asked to unwind those transactions, right? So, typically we have seen a situation like, for example, an Indian company when it's acquiring an overseas company, right? And it's a genuine business, for business purposes, that acquisition is being undertaken. And that overseas company already has an Indian subsidiary, right, for its back-end operations, or, it has operations in India for that purposes. There, because the structure was already in place and it was not set up particularly for, any kind of routing of funds, there RBI, after looking at the documents and the transaction, went ahead and approved the matter, right? Now, interestingly, till now, RBI, there was no view from RBI or anything around, how they will look at it. But interestingly, last year, the FAQs on ODI investments were amended, where RBI has added that, in case of a round tripping, while it's not permitted, but you can bring the transaction to us and we'll look at it on a case-to-case basis, and depending on the merits of the case, we'll approve it. So this is basically what, RBI has been doing in practice. They put it down on paper as well, right? Now, in this regard, there is a committee report, by a high-level advisory group constituted by the Commerce Ministry in India, which was chaired by Mr. Surjit Bhalla, right? Now, even the committee has recognizes that there are transactions which are genuine in nature, right? And there can be times, like one example that I gave, where an Indian company acquiring an overseas company with an existing Indian subsidiary, or, there may be excess cash lying with an overseas subsidiary of an Indian company, and, for its business purposes, it may want to invest that amount in India, in any other company or a group company of the holding company in India, right? So that committee has made certain suggestions around, certain transactions, which are bona fide in nature, and they have prescribed certain thresholds on determining whether, those transactions are bona fide in nature. So, for example, under the first situation where there's an existing FDI structure, what they have said is similar to, there is a restriction on 400% of net worth of the Indian company taking money out. They have said, if the FDI investment by that overseas company does not exceed 25% of the net worth of that overseas company, then that should be permitted. And, additional FDI can also be permitted where such funds are not from India. So, if in case it's from its own revenues or, from any other investment that it has raised overseas, not being a loan, because I think that's specifically restricted under the ODI regulations, then that transaction should be permitted. Similarly, where the overseas subsidiary has excess cash lying in India, in that case also it should be permitted to invest in Indian group companies or otherwise, if that investment again don't cross the 25% threshold, or it's not more than $10 million, right? So from that perspective, if these suggestions are actually incorporated in the law, I think there'll be a further clarity, and become much easier for the Indian companies to use their overseas subsidiary to do bona fide transactions in India, which as of today, you know there's always a doubt. So you need to, out of precaution, go to RBI and take their approval, which can sometime delay the whole acquisition process, etc. So I think, Vaibhav, over to you.
Thank you, Parag. I think brilliantly mentioned all the key points on key action control points on overseas acquisition. I'll just add a couple of points. Some of the questions which have been asked by me to me. When you talk about round tripping, an interesting question came. Says, I am acquiring a company, or I am setting up a company overseas. That company will transfer money to the Indian subsidiary, right, by way of service agreement, right? So it will be a earning, but that's the money which will be transferring as part of cost plus arrangement with the captive subsidiary, will be money which I am actually sending from here to capitalize the company. Will that be considered to be a round tripping, because that's the money actually coming in? And really speaking, RBI till now has never looked at that option as a round tripping. The only round tripping RBI has looked at it is if you invest overseas and then overseas companies then invest back into India in the capital. But if the money comes in other ways like income or other options, then RBI has as of now not looked at round tripping. So I think just some of my experience. Secondly, I think you talked about financial commitment not exceeding 400% of your net worth, and that's throughout the time when your investment is there. So what you need to keep in mind is that tomorrow if your net worth goes down, then you will need to bring down the financial commitments, and so you need to plan in properly when you are actually making those commitments, to know that you should have some kind of a buffer for your network going down. And if you didn't have buffer, or buffer was not enough, and if the network is actually going down and your financial commitment exceeds, you need to be able to unwind some of those financial commitments to come in line. And especially if your financial commitment is by a guarantee or something else, then you will not be able to enforce it if you're not meeting that particular commitment throughout your period. So with this, let me move to Poonam. Poonam, on Companies Act, specifically, on the merger side, right? Can you tell what are the separate regulations which you need to keep in mind which govern cross-border mergers?
Sure. Thanks, Vaibhav. So I'd like to start by giving a brief introduction on the position of law earlier, that's under the Companies Act of 1956. So under the 1956 company law, inbound mergers were permitted, which is a foreign company could merge with an Indian company, whereas outbound mergers were not particularly expressly permitted under the 1956 Act. The Companies Act 2013, under Section 234 of the Companies Act, had notified in April 2017, has permitted inbound and outbound mergers and amalgamations subject to seeking prior approval of the RBI. And the RBI in 2018 issued specific regulations called the FEMA Cross-Border Merger Regulations, which I'm just going to be touching upon to explain, to permit inbound and outbound mergers and amalgamation. So cross-border merger has been defined as a merger, an amalgamation, or an arrangement between an Indian company and a foreign company under the FEMA Cross-Border Merger Regulations. Two key things that I would like to mention under these regulations, which have come as welcome steps, is that earlier for your scheme and wherever RBI was involved, you have to go and seek express RBI approval. But under the FEMA cross-border merger regulations, there's a concept of a deemed RBI approval that has been introduced, wherein if the scheme and the particulars of the scheme are in accordance with the respective FEMA regulations and the Companies Act regulations, then it's considered as deemed approval by the RBI for that particular scheme that you want to go ahead with. There is also a concept of a standstill period that has been introduced under the FEMA cross-border merger regulations. And this is more to ensure that there's a regularization of the compliance of respective FEMA non-compliances that is there under the scheme when you go and ask for approval under the scheme. So these are the two key changes that have come in, which actually are more good changes to ensure that schemes and cross-border mergers are more promoted. And the regulations provide for inbound and outbound mergers specifically. In case of an outbound merger, an Indian company, that is wherein an Indian company is acquiring the assets and the liabilities of a foreign company, such that the resulting company is the Indian company. The cross-border regulations provide for certain key aspects that need to be complied with, which will give the deemed approval by the RBI under the cross-border merger regulation. So I'm going to break this down into a few parts just so it's clear in explanation of what needs to be complied with under the cross-border merger regulations. So first, in case of an inbound merger, the securities that are being issued upon the acquisition by an Indian company should, to the foreign shareholders of a foreign company should comply with the pricing, sectoral caps, the entry routes, and the reporting requirements under the FEMA non-debt instruments rule. Similarly, if it's a merger of a JV or a WOS of an Indian company with its Indian parent company, or say this JV or a WOS has further step down subsidiaries outside of India, wherein the Indian parent ends up acquiring these step down subsidiaries or these foreign step down subsidiaries, the Indian company will then need to comply with the conditions that is prescribed under the ODI regulations to ensure that it can tick the box for the scheme and come under the bucket of the deemed approval for RBI. Second, let's look at how the assets and the liabilities are treated of a foreign company in an inbound merger. So as per the cross-border regulations, the Indian company is permitted to acquire and hold any asset outside of India as long as it's permitted under the exchange control regulations. These assets can also be transferred if it is permitted under the exchange control regulation. Similarly, for outstanding borrowings or guarantees that have been taken from overseas sources that come into the books of the Indian company, these will need to comply with the ECB or borrowing norms of FEMA or guarantee regulations, as the case may be. And in case of any non-compliances under each of these will need to be regularized within the standstill period that I mentioned earlier, which is a period of 2 years from the date of the sanction of the scheme. So now let's look at where, in case the Indian company is not permitted to hold any assets under the exchange control regulations, what happens in that situation, right? The Indian company will then have to sell off such asset or security within the standstill period again, because that's the large window that's been single window frame that's been given for the Indian company to comply with their regulations. And the sale proceeds that it gets from the sale of such asset outside of India can be repatriated into India. In case of liabilities, if the Indian company is not permitted to assume a particular liability, then such liability will need to be extinguished by either selling the assets outside of India or using the available funds and resources to make sure that that liability is extinguished and it does not come onto the books of the Indian entity. And this again needs to be completed within the time period of 2 years from the date of the sanction of such scheme. Lastly, the last leg that I wanted to cover was in case of an existing office or a branch of a foreign company. These would then become the branch of an Indian company outside of India, again in accordance with your FEMA foreign currency account regulation. Similar to inbound mergers, outbound mergers also have very similar prongs that need to be complied with, wherein the security that is being offered by the foreign resulting company will have to be in compliance with the ODI regulations in case of an Indian party and the LRS regulations in case of an individual. Again, the assets and the liabilities that are acquired will have to comply with the standstill period for the purpose of regularization. And the branches of the offices will be treated as the branch or the office of the foreign company in India. So this was in brief the cross-border merger regulation. Some concerns that we have heard of since this is a new regulation that's been come in, and some concerns and points that we wanted to touch upon is that while the deemed approval of the RBI is actually a welcome move, this standstill period of 2 years, which is a requirement to regularize for compliance with applicable FEMA regulations, this might become a deal deterrent. And in some cases, what if the compliance has not been regularized? In that situation, these cases might have to be relooked at by the RBI for an extension, or the RBI might have to look at it from a case-to-case basis and prescribe what needs to be done in such a specific scheme and how that scheme would then become effective. From a tax perspective, while a merger or an amalgamation, which is an inbound merger, is exempt from capital gains under the Income Tax Act, under Section 47 under the Income Tax Act, a similar benefit is not yet available for outbound mergers, possibly because such a transaction was not permitted earlier. And another issue that we think that could arise is that the operations of the foreign company in India through a branch or an office could result in the foreign company having a permanent establishment under Indian laws, in which case it would be subject to a higher tax and be taxed in India. Also, an issue with branch offices is that branch offices under the foreign currency account regulations have certain limitations for the nature of activities that it can undertake. So, for instance, if an Indian branch of a foreign company is a consequence of the merger or the scheme, this would be restricted and would not be able to undertake, say, manufacturing activities, and it would be restricted to only representation or licensing activities for that particular branch for the group or the whole in India then. These were some of the points we wanted to touch upon from a cross-border merger regulations perspective. Over to you, Vaibhav.
Thank you, Poonam. I think very interestingly, we are talking about cross-border mergers. What we need to know is that inbound merger actually with RBI approval was permissible for many years now. I remember we did one of the earliest one about 8 to 10 years ago, where a company got merged in HDFC. I'll not go into details right now on that, but inbound mergers were possible. Outbound mergers were not possible, and outbound mergers are not possible in several jurisdictions. For example, one of the very common jurisdiction which is being used for holding company is Singapore. Singapore does not permit outbound foreign merger, which means that you cannot take Singapore company and merge it with, let's say, a US company or a Mauritius company or an Indian company. So you need to keep in mind that outbound mergers are not always permissible, but in India, the first step is taken. The key aspect of outbound mergers to be successful, really speaking, is the tax benefit. If it is not going to be on a tax neutral basis, or there is no chance of being in tax neutral basis, then people can do even swap of shares, right? And what we talked about earlier, doing swap of shares or in some other method in trying to go and get the shares acquired, in which case also there is no tax benefit. So this is something which we need to keep in mind. I think we have a lot to cover. So knowing that equity is not the only financial commitment which we talk about, and seeing already the questions coming with respect to loan granted to an overseas subsidiary. I will now go to Anusha and request Anusha to throw lights on financial commitments other than equity. What are different financial commitment we see other than equity when it comes to overseas investments?
Thanks, Vaibhav. So as Parag had mentioned and has yet covered, equity is one of the forms of investing in an overseas entity. But another equally interesting method of approach is funding this overseas entity by way of a loan. Now, there are a couple of conditions that need to be met prior to giving a loan to an overseas entity. The first and foremost is that you must have some equity participation in the overseas entity, which means that at the time of structuring your transaction where you've not yet acquired the equity entity, it may not be possible for you to provide a loan to that entity. However, once you have some equity participation in the same, then you can go ahead and provide loans to such a overseas entity. And as Parag also mentioned, it's important to note that loan is also considered as a financial commitment of the Indian company. So therefore, you must ensure that the threshold, which is 400% of your net worth, is not breached when this loan is provided by the Indian company. So let's just look at some of the key aspects that we need to keep in mind with respect to a loan, right? The first would probably, and an important one would be interest. Well, how is the interest calculated when this Indian party gives a loan to its overseas company? Now, the interest component is not primarily regulated from the foreign exchange perspective, but from the Companies Act perspective. If you see Section 186 of the Companies Act, it speaks about loans and investments by a company in any other company. So what it says is that the interest that the private company will give out the loan should not be lower than the prevailing yield of the closest government security that is closest in tenure to the loan. So if your loan is for a period of 5 years, then the government security prevailing yield of 5 years should be what your interest rate is. But an interesting aspect to this is that the word government securities is not defined under the Companies Act. So there have been views in the market and a couple of cases from high courts as well that you cannot apply Indian government security prevailing yield rates while issuing a loan to a foreign company. Instead, what you must apply is an international benchmark rate such as your LIBOR. So it turns out that sometimes LIBOR can be lower than the prevailing government yield rate. So it's possible for an Indian company to issue to provide a loan to its overseas sub at a lower interest rate than what it would have to provide to a company in India, keeping all things equal. Apart from the interest component, the next thing that we should also look at is the reporting requirements. The FEMA regulations require you to report and form ODI when you issue loans to your overseas company. You will also have to make certain declarations in your annual performance report. So these reporting requirements, though procedural, are very necessary and should be done in a time-bound manner. The next issue with respect to a loan is repayment. So the most traditional way of repayment would be that your loan would be repaid and your interest accrued would be repaid based on the terms of your loan agreement. However, what FEMA also allows you to do, and also somebody has asked a question in relation to the same, is that you can convert the loan and the outstanding interest amount into equity. Now, this is allowed under the automatic route without any approval, so long as certain conditions are met. The first is that you will have to report this to the Reserve Bank of India at the time of conversion by filing form ODI. Second is valuation, like how do you value the loan and how many shares in the company do you get? So now if your loan was for more than 5 million, then it needs to be valued SEBI registered merchant banker or an IB from the host country, or if it's less than 5 crores, then it can be $5 million. It can be a chartered accountant or a CPA. So once a valuation is determined, we can reach a conversion formula on how much of your loan will be converted to how many shares in the overseas company. Also, additionally, the laws of, just like in India, when you have to convert loans to equity, you have to follow Companies Act. The laws of the host country, whichever country your overseas company is in, such as UK or US, the laws of that country would also be needed to take into account and how this loan can be converted into equity. Also, from a general corporate governance point of view, although there's nothing required specifically under the Companies Act, we always recommend that you pass a board resolution approving such conversion have conversion of loan to equity in your loan documentation. So just hygiene checks in place, so you have good corporate governance. So this is with respect to a loan. The FEMA regulations also allow you to provide various securities for loans that are availed by the overseas entity or the Indian party in the form of guarantees and other pledge of shares and other forms of securities over your assets. I'll quickly go over some of the key points that we need to keep in mind when we give these securities. So first, coming to guarantees, as Parag mentioned, 100% corporate guarantee can be given by the company, or you can give 100% bank guarantee so long as it's backed by a counter guarantee from the Indian party. Basically, the bank is hedging its risk and it shouldn't go out of pocket, since bank guarantee is on demand, that you provide this counter guarantee, and 50% of performance guarantee. Again, the conditions for guarantee are similar. You must have equity participation. If you do not, then it will only be with the prior approval of the Reserve Bank of India. The guarantee must not be open-ended, which means that you need to have the tenure and the amount of the guarantee determined upfront, and you will have to do certain reporting requirements with the Reserve Bank of India. So while structuring a corporate guarantee, let's understand who all can a corporate guarantee be given by and given to. So an Indian party may give a corporate guarantee for its joint venture abroad or a wholly owned subsidiary or its first step down level subsidiary, which means that if you have a company abroad and that company has another wholly owned subsidiary, then you can provide a corporate guarantee for any loan availed by that company as well. So, however, anything beyond that would require prior approval of the Reserve Bank of India. The FEMA regulations also allow you to extend the tenure of this guarantee without it being deemed to be a fresh financial commitments on the part of the Indian company. For this, all the other conditions should remain the same except the tenure of the guarantee, and this is called rollover of guarantee. And it's if all your other conditions remain the same, RBI permits the same under the automatic route. Moving to the second security aspect, which I spoke about, is with respect to pledge. Now, pledge of shares or pledge of any other assets, there are certain key points that are common to both that must be kept in mind. The first is that who can you pledge these shares or assets to? If it's a domestic lender, that is a lender in India, it must be an authorized dealer bank or a public financial institution. If it is an overseas lender, then it must be a recognized bank in that overseas jurisdiction. So in essence, you cannot take a loan from an overseas company and then pledge shares. That is not under the automatic route, that is not allowed as per the foreign exchange regulations. The second important aspect is who can use this loan. So what the FEMA regulations are fairly liberal here, and they say that a pledge can be provided for any loan availed by the Indian company or its overseas wholly owned subsidiary, or who has provided the pledge, or any other company which is a joint venture or a wholly owned subsidiary of the Indian company. Which means that parties can decide to structure their loans in such a way that one overseas company can take the loan, and the security package can come from a different overseas company of the same Indian party. So this gives flexibility for companies on how they would like to carry out their security package. The third aspect is that the value of the loan for which this pledge has been taken is counted towards the financial commitment of the Indian party, and it should not cross the 400% net worth requirement. One major restriction that is provided when this pledge or security is provided is that the end use of the loan can only be for core business activities of the overseas company. It cannot be for any purposes where it results in money coming back to India, whether directly or indirectly. You will also need a statutory auditor certificate certifying that no money will come in directly or indirectly. The last point that I would like to cover is with respect, which is specific to each type of security. So when you have a pledge of shares, and in case you want to, if the lender, if a overseas lender or a domestic lender wants to invoke it, when an overseas lender invokes it, if the pledge is of the Indian company, then your foreign exchange regulations have to be complied with, which means your pricing guidelines and your sectoral regulations as per your non-debt rules will have to be complied with. If the pledge is of overseas assets, other than shares towards a domestic lender, then at the time of enforcement, the domestic lender will have to take the approval of the Reserve Bank of India prior to enforcing its pledge. If the charge or the pledge is on domestic assets for an overseas lender, then the same can all when it is enforced, the when the pledge is enforced by overseas lender, the sale of the assets must be to an Indian party itself, and thereafter the proceeds can be repatriated. The sale cannot be towards any overseas entity. So to sum up, like equity, which was covered earlier, loan is also a very interesting aspect that should be explored by many companies in India, given how much the regulations have developed on the same, and given how much flexibility is provided with respect to the security package, and also providing comfort to the companies that you can not only take interest on these loans that you provide to overseas companies, but you can also convert it later into equity if should you wish to do so. So back to you, Vaibhav.
Thank you. Thank you, Anusha. Can you also address a question on divestment, right? Now, the investments have been made and then, things may not work out, things may work out, but they want to exit. Indian company wants to exit. Can you tell what are the regulations which people need to keep in mind when they are divesting?
Sure. So divestment is another very key aspect with respect to any of your foreign exchange, with respect to any overseas investments, because ultimately everyone would want to get a good exit. So let's break this up into three aspects. First is when your company is not doing well and you want to write off that investment on your balance sheet. Now, RBI naturally is very sensitive about something like this because money has gone out of India and you are saying that the value of the asset that you procured has depreciated and you will not be getting any money into India. So what the regulations say is that a private company can write off 25% of its shareholding in a company wholly owned subsidiary abroad, but it must be with the prior approval of the Reserve Bank of India. The Reserve Bank of India also sets out stringent conditions like you must produce a certificate to show that the balance sheet of the overseas company is a loss-making entity and also provide a 5-year projection indicating how this write-off will benefit the Indian parties. So as you can see, they're a little sensitive about this and write-off is not as straightforward as a sale or transfer when your company is doing well. The second bucket that we can talk of is when your company is doing very well and you want to sell or transfer it to any other person. Here, the restrictions are fairly less. So first is that as long as there's no write-off in the company, you can sell it so long as your sale price is not less than the fair market value of the shares. This will be determined by a chartered accountant or a CPA based on the annual audited balance sheet of the foreign company. The company must have been in operations for at least 1 year, and they must have the Indian company should have filed an annual performance report and audited financials of the foreign company. So you cannot have a company which is operation for less than 1 year. You cannot divest your investments from such a company. Another critical aspect is that the Indian company should not be under any investigation with any regulatory authorities. Sometimes we've noticed that if there is any ongoing investigation, then any of your sales will not be permitted under the automatic route. You will have to go for approval. And lastly, there should be no outstanding dues from the wholly owned company abroad towards the Indian party. Many a times we've noticed that Indian parties and overseas companies do a lot of transactions and they forget or they fail to keep track of all the service fees and all that needs to come back into India. And later when they want to sell this company, this poses to be a serious problem because if there's any outstanding dues, you will first have to ensure that you regularize any penalties in relation to not realizing those dues and thereafter only proceed for the sale of the company. Lastly, with respect to sale of a company with a write-off, the RBI says that if you're a private company in India, as long as your investment abroad was less than 10 million, then you can do it under the automatic route. For every other sale which involves a write-off, it will be under the approval route. So just to sum up, in case of if it's your company is doing good, there are very few restrictions. But if your company is writing off your investment, then the RBI has many checks and balances in place in the form of approvals. Back to you, Vaibhav.
Thank you. Sometimes you always wonder, if things are not going well and if there is a write-off, right? Now, it's a write-off is a part of business. You go to RBI for approval, but what will RBI do? What if it does not approve? I mean, you still have to write off, right? So it becomes very sometimes interesting way of how Reserve Bank of India looks at it. Though the objective of RBI was to see whether the write off was genuine, not genuine, and in a situation is genuine, I don't think they will have any option but to approve. But I think the whole objective is to see why it happened, and is there anything which they should really know and take action for future purposes. So I think that was a key objective of from RBI perspective. With this, I'm cognizant of time, but we still need to address one major point. In the start of my session, we discussed that there are a lot of non-Indian regulation we need to keep in mind, and I would want Parag to list down some of the non-Indian regulations what we should keep in mind, and also if you can touch upon some of the issues which you have seen with respect to non-legal side, right? And what are the things which companies need to keep in mind when they are acquiring companies abroad.
Sure, Vaibhav. And I'll try to be brief because we have only some 3-4 minutes left before we can take the questions. So similar to when overseas for non-residents are investing in India, there is this whole gamut of FDI regulations that are there, and you need to comply with sectoral restrictions, and sensitive sectors. For sensitive sectors, you need to go for approval, and certain pricing guidelines, etc., have to be followed. While what we have noticed is when Indian companies acquire overseas companies or invest in their subsidiaries, the exchange control regulations are more relaxed from that perspective, as because a lot of these countries have capital account convertibility as opposed to India, especially your developed jurisdictions like US, Singapore, etc. Key things to keep in mind there is that while they have more relaxed regulations, even it's a protective kind of a protective economy everywhere. So even in UK and US there are regulations to govern acquisition of companies by foreigners, especially in case they are in certain sensitive sectors, or certain kind of transactions where there's a passive investment, etc., that is being made in the US. So in US, if it falls within something they call covered transactions, where typically your IP and all in certain sensitive sectors is being passed on to overseas entity, then you need to go for regulatory approvals. They have a body called CFIUS. It's CFIUS. I think Committee for Foreign Investment in United States. So basically, you need to take their approval. This is governed under a US Act. Similarly, under UK, while there is no specific policy as such, for governing foreign investments, but if it's in sensitive sector in terms of nuclear energy, banking and financial services, etc., there you may need to go for approval depending on the kind of transaction you're doing. And then considering that we are talking about acquisitions, if you are taking control of entities in these sectors, you will need to go for approval in these cases, right? So from an Indian law perspective, and while we advise our Indian clients on these transactions, for us also sometimes it becomes easier because we follow a system of law called common law, and when we are advising clients for the investments in US and UK, which also the basis of their legal system is also common law, it's easier to understand and navigate around some of those issues, while you'll always need a local lawyer from these jurisdictions to help you in these things. But as opposed to that, if we are advising a client who's investing in a civil law jurisdiction, which we are not that well versed with in terms of principles, etc., so there it becomes tougher from the client's perspective to understand some of those requirements. I think another very important issue that has to be kept in mind while making acquisition overseas, especially in developed jurisdictions, are the whole anti-bribery provisions, because they have very detailed provisions related to anti-bribery, which not only apply to government servants but otherwise as well. So it's very important for the Indian company to understand these regulations, because this will have an impact on how they conduct their business overseas, and they should be mindful of the do's and don'ts under these regulations. Where you asked me about non-legal side, so I think the key non-legal aspect that should be kept in mind is the cultural difference, right? Because in India, anyways, being such a diverse country, we have cultural differences within India. But when you go to another jurisdiction, there are things, because how people operate, how work ethics are, or how different situations are looked at are very different. So so from that perspective, it's very important to focus on the cultural differences between India and those countries while making an acquisition. And interestingly, there are reports that almost 30% of the mergers that fail are on account of cultural differences, because integration failed between the two companies, right? So I think that is something, while you are planning the acquisition, that is something should not be left to post acquisition stage, but should be something that should be kept in mind while you are planning the entire exercise, right? So I think, yeah, is
Thank you. Thank you, Parag. I think what we have seen, right, whenever we have seen overseas acquisition, right, we always try to identify what are the key issues which we need to keep in mind in that particular jurisdiction, right, so that we can reach out to appropriate lawyers and get it done, right? Because if sometimes if you miss it, you don't even know that you need to go and talk to someone on that line, right? If it is US, where I'm more familiar with because I sit in New York, there are three which definitely comes up. Parag already talked about CFIUS, right? And CFIUS is something which is doesn't have bright light test, right? So you always have a question: should I go for approval? Should I not go for approval? If I go for approval, it will delay my transaction. If I don't go for my approval, there is always a worry that the government can come back and unwind the transaction. And government has done that recently in many transactions where they have become a lot more active. Secondly, there is a HSR approval, which is similar to the Competition Commission approval. You always have to take a shot there to see whether you need to take that approval or not take the approval. Here, there is a bright line test, so it is easier to some extent. And the third you need to keep in mind is on securities regulation. Now, in US specifically, the securities regulations are different than how India works, right? Even though you are a private company, and if there are certain shareholders sitting in US, then you need to follow some of the processes under the securities regulations, and you will be really surprised sometimes on how how complicated they are and how time bound they need to be. So that's something which is always another kind of a flag which one needs to put in. In certain countries, I've also seen approvals check to be done from employees' perspective, whether any approval is required because there are transfer of employees or something like that. So those need to be taken into account. And obviously, when you look into from perspective of any FDI norms or something like that, if it is required, then you need to do it. Now that's not required, let's say, in Europe and US situation, because they don't have those regulations. But when you're looking at acquiring companies in Africa, in some of the East Asian countries, then those becomes very important. With this, we have limited time to take some questions. We have very interesting questions which have come up. Some we have already covered during our discussion. Some we have answered on the chat box. Still, there are many others. We will be able to take just few of them. We may not be able to take all of them. Ones which we don't take, we will send an email separately. I think the first question which I will take up is by Sushmit Ghosh. How is merger different from swap of shares? I think the primary difference, of course, there's a lot of difference. The primary difference, obviously, is that when you merge, you lose the entity, and you end up having the same assets as the entity in which you merged. Now, when it comes to cross-border transaction, they become a branch. So if a non-Indian company is merging an Indian company, then the non-Indian company which used to be there loses existence and becomes a branch. And similarly, if Indian company is merging with a non-Indian company, then Indian company will become a branch. Swap of shares, it remains a company. Now, really speaking, when you are deciding should I do a merger or swap of shares, right, what is important is to see what is easier, what is faster, and whether it makes a difference whether I'm part of the same entity or I'm a subsidiary of that entity. So that's something which you need to look at it. In most situation, When you do a swap of shares, you suffice the requirement. What your objective is generally gets sufficed. So we don't see overseas merger, but especially if there are tax benefits, you will see that to be more and more. There's another question from Dara. And Parag, maybe you may want to take this up. It's a very interesting question. When 3-4 companies join hands to make ODI in an entity, I presume net worth of all 3-4 group companies has to be taken. What happens in each of the 3-4 companies have inter se investments, which has enhanced the net worth of the said companies. Do you want to take a shot at this, Parag?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. So, I'll go by with what I understand. I think maybe some further research will be required on this. But, my preliminary view is that, you'll have to first, that's very clear that, net worth of each company will have to be taken separately, because it's an individual test and there is no group test under the ODI. And, I think that, that inter-company investment per se should not make a difference while, determining that individual threshold for the net worth criteria.
Yeah, thank you, Parag. I agree with you. I think Anusha also had answered the same question. It will be looked at individual basis, and I don't think the Bank of India has thought through this completely. Let's go to the next question. We have about 3-4 minutes. Anusha, you can take this question from Meghna. Her question is, can you cover divestment due to Competition Commission compliance?
So this again would require certain research. I mean, if there is any breach of the provisions of the competition law of the overseas, the host jurisdiction or in India, then it will be a deep analysis that will need to be done. And thereafter, in case it is breaching, then a divestment will have to be done as per the Competition Commission Act of India or the overseas regulations in compliance. So there have been situations like even taking the previous questions where when you make the investment, you may not be in breach, but thereafter later you may be in breach and you will then have to disinvest in accordance with the procedures given under the specific regulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Anusha. I think with this, we are coming close to our time. We have Nishit Desai with us in this session, and I want him to say maybe a few words, just closing remark for a minute or two.
Yes, thank you so much, Vaibhav. Wonderful presentation, very great, details about cross-border, both side inbound, outbound merger acquisitions. I see that, it's a great time to sit back and ponder as to how do you want to leverage yourself in the future. There are two sides to the coin. One, the valuations have come down, and I think they will remain down for a while. On the other hand, trillions of dollars are being pumped into the economy by all countries, So the chances of revival in a year or two are pretty good. So it depends on your appetite and depends on your, position, not only cash position, but also your value. So you can exchange shares, stuff like that, stock swap, and many other strategies one can follow. And it seems that there is a time you can build a synergy, and at a price that is, appropriate. And today is the best time, to think about it. And I believe that in a period of next 1-2 years, we'll see quite a few of this inorganic synergy will be created. And so it is very important to learn what are the nuances, both in India as well as overseas, and how do you integrate different legal and tax systems around the world is one important component of the whole game, apart from the non-legal issues, as you said, the cultural aspects and the other kind of things that may be there, So it is very good. I think this was a great initiative for many of our people in the audience, and hope that will give some guidance and direction, and we are always there to help you. But Vaibhav, wonderful panel, and I think Parag and Nisha and everybody around, to have done a very nice job, today. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.